Get started. We are going to start our recordings right on cue. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. We are really happy to be here to talk about the IRA, especially 2 days after the final guidance was just released. Today, we're going to talk about utilizing the clean energy tax credits, which is the direct pay, elective pay part of the Inflation Reduction Act. We're going to get into the what, why, where, and how of the act. As many of you all know, with the IRA has been out for a little while now, and if you're working on the ground like we have, you've been hearing kind of mixed reviews on it. Like, it is an amazing, monumental piece of legislation. But that said, there's other things that you have to know when you're trying to utilize it, and we're going to get into the specifics of that today. So, Emma, can you go to the next slide? So first of all, let's just find out who's here. So if you wouldn't mind putting your name in the chat, as well as your pronouns and the organization or city where you're joining us from. And then just really briefly, because it will get crazy in the chat, just talk a little bit about your climate priority. So just to demonstrate, my name is Jeremy Schrader. I use he, him pronouns. I am the local leaders program director here at Climate Cabinet. We're joined with our friends from the Center for Public Enterprise. We'll introduce them a little bit later. And one of the things, that our current priority is, like, really work on making sure that local leaders can pass climate policy, and to make sure we're starting with the change we want to see in our local communities. So we can go to the next slide. So that's the rest of our team. Michaela and Ethan are also part of the local leaders team. They're not able to be here today, but if you call us for help, they'll be one of the people that will be able to work on that. Next slide, please. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what the clean energy tax credits can do, and also how this will help local governments. We'll get into kind of some of the case studies of what this looks like in action. We'll be showing off the Climate Cabinet mapping tools, one tool you can use to start to get ready to take advantage of tax credits. And then after that, we'll be passing it on to the experts at the Center for Public Enterprise to go through their tool to get even deeper and get you closer to utilizing the Inflation Reduction Act. And then we'll also have time for questions. Next slide, please. So just to start off, the Inflation Reduction Act, or otherwise known as the IRA, is the largest investment in clean energy that we've seen just in our lifetime. So it's huge. It had a lot of very big benefits that we're very excited to see. Next slide, please. But it also has a lot of, it's not very simple. I would say that there's a lot of different parts, including grants, including financing, including tax credits that are available to everyone. But each one of those is a little bit different. I think one kind of issue that we've been seeing, especially coming off some of the other federal funding that we were seeing during the pandemic, the federal funding has gotten back. I would say it's returned to normal, where there are a lot of strings and a lot of guidelines that you need to meet to qualify for the funding. And I think that's been somewhat of an adjustment. I think there was the hype that this would be a program that would look much more like pandemic funding, where there wasn't a lot of strings attached, which in one way got a lot of money out the door when it needed to. Here, I think this is a little bit more of a mixed bag, where it is phenomenal funding pushing us toward a vision. And I think while I hopefully don't sound too down on the guidelines, these are guidelines that I think will help our country and your community more, but they are things to think about as you're planning ahead. Next slide, please. So local governments can take advantage of the clean energy tax credit. It is something that before you'd have to go to a developer or someone like a mill person just to be able to take advantage of federal funding to be able to develop the project yourself. But now one of the things, at least we're really excited about, is that local municipalities can take advantage of the IRA and to take advantage of federal funding to do these programs themselves. They can look at replacing coal plants with solar arrays. They can look at putting solar with batteries on areas that were formerly brownfields. So it opens up a lot of possibilities, but that said, it comes with its own challenges. Next slide, please. So it is something that there are guidelines, and as I was kind of hinting at before, there are stipulations that make it a little bit more tricky for local governments that may not have had the expertise in working with tax credits and working with these guidelines before. But these guidelines really are meant to bring about the change we want to see. For example, working with wage and apprenticeship requirements, making sure that we're paying living wages for the development of these projects, making sure that we're using products that are built in this country. While a lot of that, there are concerns that there isn't enough of that type of development right now. The IRA is also future thinking about, well, if we are going to develop that market, we need to start having that demand in this country now. It creates a challenge, it creates some uncertainties, but hopefully, with all of your help, all of you on the call, we can get there and really kind of make that change we're hoping to see. Um, I think another part of this that we're really finding, folks, I think all of you on the call, as well as the drafters of the IRA, they really want to see this change. They believe in a more just world. They believe in a renewable world, more sustainable world. And a lot of these programs are not set up, for folks that are necessarily ready. We have, to give you one example, for just the great benefits we're seeing pushing out EVs. Like I recently purchased an EV, and it was something that I had to talk to the dealer about what those rebates would look like. They didn't know. And I think, as someone that's worked on policy for a long time, when you're giving out free money, you expect folks to be a little bit more understanding about it and ready to take advantage of it. And that just isn't the case right now. So that's one of the things that Climate Cabinet and our cohort of elected leaders is working on talking with stakeholders about how they can access what I would call free money. What they would say is it's money, but it is something that it's a little bit harder for them to take advantage of. Next slide, please. So let's get into what these tax credits look like in action. Next slide, please. So two cities want to highlight that we're able to take advantage of this even before the final guidance were San Antonio, Texas, and Lebanon, Ohio. Both of them were solar projects on municipal buildings. So there's a lot of things going for these projects. Both cities were very, very smart on how they did, in my opinion, on how they did this. They used land that they already control. These are buildings that they have access to without any other issues. They did it in a kind of a much more distributed way. There are advantages to that. We can get into that in the questions. I won't get into it now, but I thought there were some things, especially in San Antonio, they did very, very smart where they were able to make sure they met guidelines while also meeting kind of the spirit of what was the intent of the IRA to be able to maximize the dollars they were able to get to see this project happen, and also make sure that they had benefit for their cities. Next slide, please. So that's one thing. And I think the San Antonio and Lebanon, one thing, both of those cities I want to highlight, they had the resources and the know-how to start on those projects before going out after the IRA. And I think that those projects took time to happen. And a lot of the cities we're talking about, they're starting from ground zero, where they see this great opportunity with the IRA to make their communities better and to go forward with things they were hoping to do. But that's a lot different than having a plan on paper. So what we want to do now is show, an example of how you can walk through community process. Next slide, please. So first, you know your community. You know where there's areas you'd like to see something that right now would be a blight. It's not great in the community. That can be so much better. You live there, you deserve better. What can you do? But you may not know all of the things that will help you, fill out an application for the IRA and for direct pay. So first, if we could, I will put in the chat, I'm going to be using the Climate Cabinet mapping tool. It is something that is available to all. It's just on our website, putting the link in there now. And so that's what's up on the screen. So you choose your location. You can put this is Eugene, Oregon. You can also just put in the county, and it will break you down into where those spots are. You can see all of the different parts that are highlighted. So on the right-hand side where you see the select layers, you'll see distressed communities, energy communities, Justice 40, low-income census tracts. All those are designations for federal funding. So one of the things I like about this map, not only does it show you how all of these programs are lowered, these are different federal programs that you can get funding through, or they're adders to specific programs. They show areas that qualify for multiple parts of it, And then if you scroll below, which unfortunately our slide doesn't show, it shows you all the federal funding that might be available and what you need to meet that. If you can go to the next slide. So with that information, you can take a spot like this. So this in Eugene, Oregon, is the J.H. Baxter lumber supply area. It was recently closed. It's a brownfield. The EPA right now is going through and designating it, a Superfund, seeing like all of like how is the soil, what will remediation take. The community sees this and goes, well, let's take something that has been a blight and hard on our frontline communities and turn that into a positive and make this renewable solar array or something much, much better with this site. Can you click on the next slide, please? So here on the map, you see that it hits a number of them. Like this is a Justice 40 community, and this is a low income census tract. So there is available funding. There is, as you can kind of see on the right, you'll see much more. It shows that it's available for direct pay, as well as solar for all, and give you just an idea. And I would say that that's just the start. I think one issue with the IRA is the assumption that that's enough information for a city, when that's enough to start. A city with this information will be able to talk to the community, reach out to developers, reach out to consultants to really have a good design for this, to find out what the community wants, and to really make sure that you can have something that everyone can agree on and everyone can support. Can you go on the next slide, please? So here's a little more specifics. Underneath the map, you'll get this tax credit programs, and it will show a little bit more about, the direct pay and exactly what the base benefit is and the bonus amounts. So the base benefits, they're fantastic, and they are something that is supposed to level the playing field and make sure that when folks are looking at what is possible, that a better world is possible, that renewables are possible, that a lot of the things that many communities thought were out of reach because of costs are no longer out of reach. That said, it also shows what the bonus amounts are. What other things, what other adders can you have on there by building a project that's going to be better for the community and better for your area overall. Next slide, please. All right, and after this, I'm going to be turning it over to our friends. Tarek Lala is with the Center for Public Enterprise, and both what I love about their tools really gets into a lot of the detail. So I'm excited to hand it over. Tarek, are you on?
Yes, I am. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jeremy. It's a pleasure for us at the Center for Public Enterprise to be here. I'm here with my colleague, Advait Arun. And so I am the Energy Policy Director at the Center for Public Enterprise. And just briefly, a little bit about our work. We focus a lot on how state and local governments and nonprofits can get directly involved in economic development in their communities in matters that are of interest to them. So, getting affordable housing built, and in my case, trying to get energy projects built, clean energy projects with the money that is available in the Inflation Reduction Act, as well as sources from your cities and states. And so I'm here to talk a little bit more about elective pay and to show you, I think, some of the benefits that it can offer to your communities, and to talk a little bit about how to access it. So let's go to the next slide. I do want to note that we just, in the last couple of days, got draft rulemaking out on how elective pay will operate in practice. We've gone through previously several rounds of sort of Treasury puts out draft rules, we comment on them, but we have close to final rules. The final publication is on the 11th, I believe it is. And so we've gone through those rules, and we've taken a look and seen, what do they offer communities? What do they change about what we expect? What do they make different? And I'm here to report that the rules are quite functional. They allow you all to make use and access of this money, but they do tell us a couple things. Number one, there are mechanisms in the rules for you to partner with other entities in getting your projects built. We can talk more about how and in what context those rules operate. Number two, we're still waiting for information from Treasury on a couple of things that would further inform how you might finance some of your projects. I'm happy to get into those details as well. But the other and third big thing is eligibility will not be a problem. A variety of tax-exempt entities, nonprofits, state and local governments, agencies of those governments will be able to make use of this money. And that money is not competitive in the sense that if you apply for it once, you can apply for it again. If you've applied for it for a particular kind of project, you are not restricted from applying for it on another project, and your application is not in conflict with somebody else's application. So all of these things are very, very important to know. I'm, again, very happy to talk about some of the more specific details of the rulemaking, but for our purposes, the fact that you can partner up with other entities is perhaps the biggest news out of this rulemaking. Next slide, please. Now, I'm going to talk briefly about how to model some of these projects and to illustrate some of these benefits. But before I get into the project finance modeling, I actually want to go over to the next slide and talk briefly about why I'm doing this. So elective pay, just to reiterate, is a mechanism that allows tax-exempt entities of all varieties to access the money that is available in the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits. Using the investment tax credit, which is perhaps the most famous one and likely the one most applicable to energy projects you all or groups you're affiliated with might be considering, if you do an energy project and it costs $1 million, you could get 30% or more of that $1 million back once the project is in operation. And so it's sort of in that sense like a grant, and it's particularly important because you would have to finance that $1 million somehow if you wanted to put up a solar farm or if you wanted to put up a wind turbine or a battery. And the more of that money that can come directly from the federal government in that way, the less you have to rely on more expensive sources of money. And so these three columns here that I've shown are called capital stacks. A capital stack is quite literally just a list, a stacked list of different financing sources from most expensive in this case, or excuse me, from least expensive to most expensive, or the other way around. And the more you can fill in that stack with cheap or free sources of capital, like elective pay, tax credits, the less you have to rely on more expensive sources, the cheaper your overall project gets, and the more benefits that you can deliver to your community members. That is what this is trying to illustrate. And that's the basic premise about how elective pay gets integrated into financial modeling, which I will now show. So I will share my screen and take us over to the financial one. I would need permission to share screen. Oh, if someone could make that happen. Perfect. Thank you so much. Okay. Can everybody see this model? Yep, it's up. Okay. Now, I took the liberty of modifying this model ever so slightly because we have information on potential projects located in Eugene, Oregon. So I took one of those projects with information that Jeremy and his team and others provided and put in as much of that information into the model as I could. So what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to be walking you all through what this model is, what it tells us about energy projects, how to make use of it, and what it tells us about elective pay. So go through the entire model. And then at the end, we'll be happy to take questions when this is all done. And then after the model is over, my colleague, Abhay, will be talking a little bit more about how to apply for elective pay, to kind of literally go through the process that the IRS has set up. So there are two things that go into any kind of energy model. And I should say this model is based on ones that already exist for private projects, but to our knowledge, this remains one of the few, if not only ones that are available for elective pay projects. All of these models, some of which are available on the internet, do two things. They take financial information about the project, right? What interest rates does it face? What's the energy price? How much does it cost? And couples it with technical information about a project. What kind of system is it? How much power will it generate? What is its capacity factor? Putting those two together, you can then create various kinds of projections about what the project will produce, how much money will it generate, how much debt will you have to pay off. You compare those two, and if they compare favorably, you should proceed with the project. If they don't compare favorably, you might have to adjust a couple of the inputs, like, for example, how much money the project charges for, and so on and so forth. So it's the basic premise of the kind of calculation that we're doing here. This is the input screen of the project, and it's divided into three portions. I've taken the liberty of labeling those portions at various points, and so I'm going to walk you through each of them. The first, which is this rectangle right here, which I've labeled here, allows you to provide information about the tax credits, right? And so one thing I will say is the tax credits are, you would consider the tax credits as if you were applying for the regular kind of tax credits as like a private entity, which is that you have to enter in information that you think you will be eligible for. The first of which is which tax credit. There's two of them, right? The ITC and the PTC. For smaller projects that are particularly capital intensive, i.e. many of the projects you all might be considering, the investment tax credit is likely the one you will use, which is it gives you a certain percentage of the project cost back once the project is in operation. The credits are also not flat. They get adjusted up or down based on certain conditions that your project meets or certain bonus criteria that it might qualify for. So an important one, for example, is the project when it's being developed and built paying prevailing wages and meeting apprenticeship requirements that are set by the government. If it doesn't, elective pay values go down. So the base ITC value, if you meet prevailing wage requirements, is 30%. If you don't meet prevailing wage requirements, it goes down to 6%. So there is, as you can tell, a heavy, heavy incentive, as there should be, right, to pay workers well who are going to be developing these projects. Now, there are bonuses associated with these projects, which are, for example, is it located in an energy community, or does it qualify for what are called environmental justice or low-income community benefits? If you qualify for either of these, that base 30% can grow. So just as an example, if the project is located in an energy community, the base 30% goes up by 10 percentage points, which is 10% more of the project that will be covered. And so instead of covering 30, it'll cover 40, right? There are two types of environmental justice bonuses, a low-income community or tribal community bonus, or a residential project or low-income economic benefit project. The first one gives you an additional 10%. The second one gives you up to an additional 20%. And so you can stack these bonuses. You can get multiple of the bonuses. The critical piece is that if you qualify for them, you are able to claim them. There is a bit of an asterisk in that for the environmental justice bonuses, only a certain number of projects across the year are able to claim them, but the energy community bonuses, like the elective pay credit itself, uncapped, right? And so what the calculator does is it allows you to enter all of that information, and the calculator will do the work of figuring out, okay, at the end of the day, what is the total elective pay that you are getting? So basically, this calculator is reading all of this information and saying, okay, based on this information about what your project qualifies for, you should get 26% of the project cost back. And if I adjust some of these, right, it goes higher. So if you meet domestic content requirements and don't require a safe harbor on them, you get 34% back. If you stack that with an energy community bonus, you get 43% back, and so on and so forth. I can talk about, if folks are curious, what some of these bonuses are, why I selected the versions that I did, but I was trying to be as realistic as possible about what this project might claim. And so what I figured is it would meet domestic content requirements, it would get an exemption on domestic content, which would mean it doesn't get the bonus, but it doesn't get penalized for not meeting domestic content, and that means the project is getting 26% back. There is a slight penalty for projects that use tax-exempt municipal debt, which I do have this project using, and so that penalty is applied, and so this illustrates how much you are getting back. Right? And again, happy to go into further detail later on if folks have questions. The second piece of this input screen are the technical pieces of the project. You know, what kind of energy prices are going to charge, or how fast do energy prices grow? How fast do your operations and maintenance expenditures grow? I have fixed these for the purposes of this Eugene project. You often don't have to adjust these unless you have very specific information on your project. And so there's not, for our purposes, as much to talk about here. And it also includes certain pieces of information that don't apply to these two cells right here. But if you are interested in adjusting them, the menu allows you to. The last two pieces, however, are important for your purposes, which are, where does this project's financing come from? Elective pay projects have to be financed in total, even though you are getting elective pay back, because elective pay doesn't get paid until your project is in operation. And so when it's getting built, when it's getting designed, you still have to pay people to do that construction, buy the materials, and all the rest of it. And then only then will you get elective pay later. And so you have to provide information on where is the rest of that money going to come from. As you saw with capital stacks, that money can come from a variety of different locations. You don't all have to get it from one source. And so what I have here is, and I'm just gonna actually, I'm gonna adjust this in real time. I have 15% of this money for the total project coming from either some grant or some savings that the nonprofit or the local government may have, and then the remaining amount of that money coming from tax exempt municipal debt. You can mess with these, you can mess with the interest rates on each of those financial payments, and at the end, the project will split out a kind of blanket interest rate across all of your financing, which is called a weighted average cost of capital. I've also had put in the option to adjust other interest rates that are important for the project. Like, for example, if you park some of the savings from that project in a savings account, what interest rate will you get on that, and so forth. You can also ignore all of this, and if you just know what your average interest rate is going to be, you can just choose to put that in here, and you can just say no to using this default menu feature. Again, happy to talk through all of that in the future. Once you have gone through entering all of this information, we go over to our main screen here, which shows you the project information. There are a couple other pieces of information about the project that you should put in and check before you go through and read all of this information, and I'm going to just walk through them briefly. One, what kind of project is it? This is a solar project tab, and so there's a number of different solar project types. I've entered DG for distributed generation. Is the project making use of renewable energy credits or renewable energy certificates? This is an important one. If you get the ITC, do you use it to pay back project debt, or do you use it for something else? Currently, I have the model saying, yeah, once we get the ITC, if we have outstanding debt on this project, we just use it to pay down that debt and thus reduce the cost. But some of you may not want to do that. Some of you may want to use that money for additional purposes. So you have the option to see how that affects your project finances. There's an energy price entry, and then an entry that basically allows you to decide, are you just going to input a flat cost for the whole project, or are you going to go through the model's more complex features to determine a project cost? You might do this if you don't have specific cost information, but we did. We had a specific cost number that was provided to us, so we were able to just enter it into the model and skip some of the model's more advanced features about determining a project. But if you didn't have specific cost information, you can also use this calculator to figure out what your project cost will be. The only other thing that I would have had to enter are a capacity factor. We picked a default value, and then the system size, which was also provided to us. And so you can do that here. Once all of that information is entered in, then we can go on to reading what the model is telling us. And the model is, you can think of it kind of like a timeline. It shows every year in the project. We started this modeling in 2023, so eventually we will change the public version to just saying 2024. But the first year of construction would be this year, according to this model. And every single year, it shows what's going on that year, construction or operation. And then you can go down and read how each of these factors apply to the model. So, for example, only in the first year, you have capital expenditure. Some of that is with cash, some of that is with a bridge loan, and then that bridge loan may be spread out to cover the costs of construction over those 3 years. When the project first goes into operation, you notice you will get elective pay, and that elective pay calculation is, as I told you earlier, 26% of this capital cost on the project. So you've got elective pay, and then you can utilize it. Once the project is in operation, it shows you your operation and maintenance expenditures, interconnection. It calculates a total cost. It shows you how much the project is producing based on the technical factors of the project that you put in. It shows you your revenues, your net income. It also shows you that on the portion of the project that you financed with debt, kind of like a mortgage, what your mortgage payments are on that project, or debt payments. So the principal, the interest, and the total debt service coverage. Finally, and this is important, it shows you how large that debt service is as a percentage of your income, which is called the debt service coverage ratio. Basically, the idea of a debt service coverage ratio is if it's greater than or equal to 1, you're bringing enough, and you are bringing in enough to meet your financial obligations on that project. If it's less than 1 in a given year, you're not. And this is important because it's not necessary that you bring in every single year of the project, enough to cover project expenses, because you can rest assured that maybe in future years you might bring it up. So what this model does in order to calculate viability is just ask, across the project, on average, is the project meeting average debt service or not? And if it's higher than one, it is, and it's viable. You all have the option to change that and make it more stringent if you want. So if you want to meet 1.5 times that ratio, you could enter 1.5. You can adjust the energy price that the project will charge customers and make it higher or lower and see what that does. And so all of the factors that I described to you earlier are feeding into this calculation to see, look, under the information that has been provided on this project, is it viable or not? And for those of you who are interested, there are more complex pieces of information about the project as well, like what's its lifetime output, what's its subsidized levelized cost of capital, our unsubsidized levelized cost of capital, what's the recovery factor. If you're interested in any of those, I can talk about them. But this is the main indicator that you all might be looking for, which is, are you able to cover the payments that it's supposed to pay? And if you are, great. And then you can also take a look at the timeline here and figure out, how much cash does it leave you on hand to do other stuff with. For example, building additional projects, subsidizing low-income customers, investing in energy resiliency in a part of your community. This can tell you all of that on how much money is available for these purposes. I'm going to pause there and just note that CPE is constantly working on changing up this project. We stand ready to help governments and nonprofits work on customizing this calculator to suit their particular purposes, or to work with you all in different ways to create specialized versions of the calculator if it doesn't seem to have something right now that you are looking for. The one I showed you very closely mimics what is on our website, but again, we are not limited to what is on the website. We can always alter it if there is a reason to, and if somebody wants us to. So with the slides, I think, can now go back up, and I will turn it over to Advait to talk about how to apply for elective pay.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chirag. And as I put in the chat, please get in touch with the Center for Public Enterprise if you're curious about how to better deploy this model to work on your projects. Hopefully this all showed you all how, if you have an example project or something you're thinking of developing, hopefully this shows how you can actually use the model yourself to determine financing cost assumptions, the kind of power you can charge, and ultimately if this project's going to be financially viable. Anyway, by way of introduction, I'm Advait. I'm the Energy Policy Associate here at the Center for Public Enterprise, working pretty closely with Chirag and the rest of our team, not just on elective pay modeling, but also on green bank program design and just generally diving into the arcana of different federal lending programs that can support public and nonprofit and community developers. I'm going to quickly talk about how to access elective pay. You might have all seen that recently the IRS put up a portal for actually allowing entities that are eligible to use elective pay to pre-register to get their credit and to transfer their credit if that's applicable to them. This portal is not exactly easy to use. It requires a lot of different things that you as a developer should know. Maybe it's going to require you guys to provide or secure technical assistance in order to make it happen. But CPE has put out a guide for how to understand this portal and the handbook associated with it. I'm going to walk through some of those takeaways right now. Next slide, please. So in a lot of our work on elective pay, we've tried to map out how exactly a public developer or a nonprofit developer, maybe even you all, are going to be using elective pay to make your project pencil out. We've come up with some schematics. You can find this in our elective pay financing report for just generally the procedure by which you as a developer could begin a project, secure elective pay, develop your project, place the project in service, get your elective payment, start earning some revenue, and ideally, in our minds, recycle that revenue from the elective payment and your free cash flow into new project development. But the part that I want to focus on right now that Chirag is focused on the rest of the modeling stuff, is in that yellow box in like the center left of this little slide, where you, as a developer, seek eligibility to access your elective payment, and the IRS gives it to you. What actually goes into that process? I know this diagram only shows just one arrow between those two boxes, but in reality, there's a lot of steps that you as a developer will have to go through. Next slide. So as I just mentioned, the IRS has put out a portal for registering for elective payment. This portal is designed for the IRS to generally do elective payment disbursement in a more easy, clean fashion. The IRS is generally worried about fraud. They're generally worried about making sure that they can do this in a timely manner. And I think their reasoning here by putting up this pre-registration portal, even in advance of filing your Form 990T equivalent of your tax return, even in advance of filing the forms that actually get you your elected payment, the IRS wants to know if you're even intending to apply and the specs that your project conforms to, where it is, what kind of credits it's going to get. Essentially, it's on the IRS is asking everyone to make it easier on their end to be able to get their elected payments out to you all as fast as they can at the end of the tax year. So you can authorize your account on this IRS website and you can go through the portal, but it's a long portal. And there's a few things that you might want to know about how to use it. Next slide. So first things first, there are two steps that developers really need to take. The first that I'm talking about right now is pre-registration. Later on, after your project is placed in service, after you're waiting for your, well, in order to actually access your elective payment, you have to do the equivalent of tax filing. Even though elective pay eligible entities are generally tax exempt entities, except for the edge case of a renewable energy cooperative a rural electric cooperative that actually does pay taxes. In that edge case, then I guess there is a tax liability. But in all other cases, there's no tax liability. You still have to you still have to do the equivalent of a tax filing using, I think, Form 990T that the IRS is providing to tax exempt entities. But before that, pre-registration. To even access pre-registration in the first place, your entity is going to need a EIN, Employment Identification Number, which a lot of taxable entities already have. It's not hard for tax exempt entities to get one, but that's where the process really starts. The next thing is that for anyone filing using this pre-registration portal, only one registration package is allowed per entity per tax filing year. Um, by that, it's not that you can't, well, what you can do is submit a registration package with all of the projects you're planning to develop and access elective pay for. Then you can receive that approval from the IRS a little bit later. And if there's anything wrong or anything you need to correct, or maybe you have more projects, you can amend your package. But at any point, every single entity can only have one registration package in the IRS's queue at any given time. And that's essentially what this big restriction this big restriction means. The IRS wants to deal with all of your projects all at once and not have to deal with you filing multiple things for multiple projects. And the IRS's, I guess, timeline is that they want you to put in your registration packages at least 120 days before the April 15th tax filing deadline. So what that means is by next January, that is probably when a lot of you all should be submitting your pre-registrations in order to make sure the IRS has 120 days in advance of tax filing for them to actually approve you for an elective payment disbursement in the future. In the actual pre-registration portal, there's a lot of different ways by which you can register your projects, or at least set your projects up for registration. You're going to need detailed filing and documentation about a lot of aspects of your project. The IRS portal guidebook, which these guidelines we're sharing here on the slide are sourced from, has a lot of the details about what kind of information the IRS wants out of your project. But it includes really specific geolocation data. It includes different contracts you have with construction contractors, some financing sources. Generally, information on developing your project, the IRS is very interested in having it in this pre-registration process. And the last thing is that to be eligible to get elective pay on a certain project, that project needs to be placed in service at the time of being put into the pre-registration application. So if you're submitting your pre-registration on January 15th, I think 120 days before April 15th, your project needs to be placed in service officially by January 15th. That is probably the biggest restriction on the timeline of this whole process, because if your project's not placed in service when it's registered or when it's pre-registered, the IRS isn't going to try and take notice of it. There's I guess, a case in which you could submit your pre-registration earlier than January 15th before a project is placed in service, get your pre-registration packet back from the IRS 120 days later with approvals or corrections, or perhaps the IRS needs something clarified. And in your clarification, in your amended package, you can add another project that's placed in service. There's something in the guidebook about how this is actually allowed. It looks like the IRS is okay with allowing you to add new projects being placed in service over time, so long as you're able to do it. Your initial package submission comes at least 120 days before the tax filing deadline in April. So next January, that's when everyone needs to be looking towards as I think the first end date of the first round of elective pay projects. So I guess the last few things are all they're all small notes here. Every project or facility you submit in your pre-registration packet gets a unique registration number. This is the registration number that when you actually file your Form 990Ts later on in the tax year to actually get your elective payment over the summer after the tax filing deadline's done, that's the registration number that's the IRS is going to be using to identify how much credit you actually earn or whether or not you even earn the credit in the first place. If the IRS sends back your pre-registration packet with errors or corrections needed, anything questions they have for you, you have 35 days to respond to the IRS with an amended package. Don't wait. I suppose 35 days is really not that long, but that's another thing the IRS seemed very, well, their guidebook stressed the 35-day deadline multiple times. I think that's pretty much it in terms of these like summary steps in the registration, in the pre-registration process. In the next slide, we'll go through, I think, generally the order of operations now that you know all the little ins and outs of what's, I guess, the most important ins and outs of the pre-registration process. Next slide, please. Yeah. Chirag, it looks like you have something to quickly add. So if you want to throw that in before we go through this steps.
Oh, I don't. Please continue.
Got it. You unmuted, and I thought, great. Okay. Last but not least, before we go back to talking about elective pay writ large, I want to finish this discussion about the pre-registration portal to just highlight the order of operations that you as a developer will go through. First things first, you should know what credits your project is eligible for. In the case of the J.H. Baxter the J.H. Baxter solar site that would be taking over from the existing blighted site in Portland, we would be selecting credits for the project. We'd be selecting credits for the project, ITC or PTC, and determining the tax year under which they'd be placed in service for. The tax year, there are a lot of ways in which local organizations, nonprofits, communities have their own tax years that are different from the federal government's tax year. The IRS has ways to standardize this, so I wouldn't worry too much about what tax year you're claiming it for, so long as you do the pre-registration process right, using all the knowledge you just gained reading the handbook, taking these, listening to this webinar, so on. Complete your pre-registration at least 120 days before the regular tax deadline, and then at the time of the tax deadline, file your Form 990T exempt organization income tax return and any other relevant forms which are listed in the IRS portal guidebook, just to make sure that you actually get your elective payment. Then the IRS will process all of this and give you your elective payment based on the credit in question. The ITC is dispersed as a lump sum payment after the project is in service. You can use that to pay down your project debt or keep it in cash flow or use it for anything else you need. But the production tax credit comes once a year for 10 years straight based on how much energy your project actually produces. And I guess a little fun fact to add, in our earlier link on our original CPE financial model, if you scroll down that page below the link to downloading our original spreadsheet, you'll see a little model that allows you to see the trade-offs between ITC and PTC in terms of the net present value of the amount of credits you earn. So if you want to play with, oh, how big is my project? What credits am I getting? What bonuses am I meeting? You can actually see which credit might be better for you, ITC or PTC, depending on your particular interests. Next slide, please. All right, and now I'll pass it back to Chirag to talk about the last bit of constraints with regards to using and deploying elective payments.
Yeah, so let's go to the next slide and I'll begin. So, whether you are representing a nonprofit or whether you are representing a state or local governing agency, there are issues you should consider if you want to make use of elective pay. And number one is elective pay gets dispersed once a project is in operation. And that means you have to go through the steps to get an energy project into operation. That includes everything from figuring out, will you contract with someone to build it? Do you have construction capacity yourself if you are a governing agency in order to build it? Finding and securing financing, making sure your construction labor force is lined up, but also just making sure that your organization or government is comfortable making those investments. We don't shrink from the fact that an investment in a physical facility that you own is a significant thing, right? It is a significant thing to have to make that bet. But We would also say that if you are clear-eyed about what those risks are and what the benefits are, then it can be the right thing, especially now that the federal government has put up so much money in order to make it happen. Additionally, with the partnership rules and with the ownership rules of IRA, there are situations where you can contract out key capacities in order to make your project happen. So, for example, as long as you remain the owner of the project, you will get elective pay, which means you can find a construction firm to help you build the project. You can find a different firm to help you operate it or collect revenue from it or manage it if that's what you need to do. Uh, you can also do a lot of that stuff yourself. Again, if you're a governing agency and you have those abilities. And, depending on what you choose to do with the project, for example, if you choose to sell into wholesale markets, there might be a variety of other rules that you have to tackle. You may have to tackle the interconnection processes. We don't hide or also shrink from the fact that those are also significant processes to go through on top of what Advait was talking about with respect to elective pay rules. But if you want to make use of the elective pay provisions, particularly on energy generation projects, those are important considerations to keep an eye out for and to be planning for ahead of time so that when the time comes to actually undergo all of this, you're ready to take on those challenges and you're ready to also know what kinds of technical assistance you should be on the lookout for and ask for. And, CPE ourselves is one such organization that can provide assistance on specific types of capacity issues, but there are also other organizations doing good work on each of these things. And we can work on constructing an ecosystem to help you all get the resources.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dragan. I really appreciated that great presentation. Our whole point today, I think, was to really go a little bit deeper than what we've kind of seen in kind of other presentations. Like we really are focused on an equitable implementation of the IRA, and some of the difficulties that we're seeing is just a lack of resources for every community. So I really appreciate just how in depth we were able to get. I will say, kind of the first question just for the Center for Public Enterprise. Well, I guess just an accolade. I just really appreciate the kind of shout out to offer to help. It's something that what Climate Cabinet's working with in its cohorts of elected officials is making sure we have an elected official on board, that they're communicating on the ground with communities to make sure that what they're trying to convert to is something that the community wants. And third, making sure that the city staff is on board, that everyone, as you put, is going in eyes wide open about the risks and about future benefits. So it is a lot. Like I will admit, the first time I clicked on your tool, I did do a double take. It's a little more tool than I can handle with my expertise. But I also want to assure everybody on this that Climate Cabinet, as well as the Center for Public Enterprise, is, our whole purpose is to help you. And so please reach out. We work together. We want to make sure that while there are some risks, the benefits far outweigh that. And we want to help you get there. So on that, the next part is just we've got time for some questions. We've had a couple in the chat. I'll read off the first one. As I saw the tax exempt penalty in the model, I think they got to that one already. If there is a follow-up, please put that in the chat. The next question was, is the process similar to taking advantage of the commercial clean vehicle credit, even though they're not technically projects, just vehicle purchases?
Yeah, so I'll turn it over to Advait in case he has more specifics, but I will say the process is similar in that you have to use the portal if you are making those purchases and you want to claim the credit on those purchases. And so the portal will have a different series of steps of information that you have to log for the commercial vehicle credit, and that's the credit you would select as you are going through. Advait, if you want to add anything more to that.
I don't think so. I think if you're still applying for payments from the IRS for the commercial clean energy, the commercial vehicle credit, then I think a lot of the same steps about pre-registering, doing your Form 990T and other forms later, having really good data on the actual projects, the purchases you're doing, providing that to the IRS, all of that generally should stay the same. Oh, and probably the 120-day deadline. So January and April, those are still the 2 months to remember.
Before we go on to the next question, I want to add something to Advait's explanation in the chat on the tax exempt penalty. And this is something that is visible in the tool. I won't pull it up now and show it, but The elective pay pieces can get a bit confusing depending on if they're talking about percentage points or percentages. So the base elective pay is 30%, but I don't want you all to leave thinking that just because you use tax exempt debt, that 30% will drop to 15%. It won't. That's the penalty is not percentage points, but percent of the total elective pay money that is owed to you. So if you are owed $100 through elective pay, you will lose 15 of those dollars if you utilize tax exempt debt, right? And so on larger credit amounts, you'll notice that's why the elective pay penalty on our credit went from 30% to 26% and not from 30% to 15. So it's our tool makes a distinction of when percentage points are applied and when percents are applied, because these distinctions become even more crucial when we start talking about something like the production tax credit, which deals with a totally different unit set. And so our model is built to adjust for those kinds of things.
Great. Just jumping on to the next question. For smaller municipal governments, what staffer is the most ideal to hear this information, and what level of detail? Is it the town manager or private developer who can teach the government how the direct pay capital stack would work? They say, I'm not sure if an elected unless they're a solar champion would be the best fit. And there's a follow-up of, also, should government buy insurance in case they don't qualify for elective pay? Or is this a waste of money? So I'll tackle this first, then others can jump in. I think first, honestly, from getting this from idea to done is start with who's strong. If you have a solar developer, that's fantastic. Let's start talking to them. If you have an elected official who may or may not know anything, that's fantastic. Let's start there and then start building that education. Before you even get to some of these tools, you have to build the groundswell of support and build the kind of coalition that's going to go eyes wide open into investing in this better future. That's what it's going to take to get through all of the permitting, all of the finances, all of the other obstacles that are in the way. They're all doable, but it is helpful to kind of bring them together. But what I appreciate about the question, you do need to get some people with the type of technical expertise. So if you're not able to find that in an elected official, you're not able to find that in the coalition, that may mean you need to go outside of that. And that's where we're here to help. We have national networks that we can connect you up with experts.
I'd like to add a bit to that answer, which is I'll use myself as an example. I live in a small town, and the small town has a select committee, it has a town manager, and they tend to present to the public every so often on, what is the town up to? And the last presentation included what they were doing, for example, on solar panels, right? And so it's worth looking through your local governments to see, who is tasked with building things, who is tasked with procuring things. Also, you should be thinking about, ultimately speaking, the requirement to get elective pay is to be an owner of that system. And so which agency might ultimately be the owner? And if the owner is different from the part of the government that actually does the investing, the buying, the procuring, the signing of contracts, that's important to know too, right? And so it's very much asking a question of a lot of these authorities might well exist, even if the interest doesn't, in order to do it. And so it's worth asking, who does this stuff? And having a conversation with them, because just because your electeds may be opposed or reticent doesn't mean these people will also be opposed or reticent, right? And they'll be able to give you a pretty clear sense of, okay, we know we have the capability to do this, but what we really need is an extra $100,000 appropriation to hire another person to help us do this, this, and this. It's worth having those conversations and approaching them knowing that these people are not electeds and it's not necessarily their job to be opposed or in support. And so, the civil service or public service staff of a local government, I think, is worth talking to, and also considering different departments. It's not necessarily the case that it has to be one or other type of department that does this, right? A school district can also put solar panels on top of its roof. And so they might not necessarily utilize the economic development corporation staff. They might utilize their own procurement staff. And so it's have these conversations because it might be different in every location.
That is a fantastic point. I think I would just add to just expand the creativity. My background's in affordable housing, so tax credits are not new to me. But I'm kind of shocked and amazed by how much it gets siloed in a city, of how the housing staff do not talk to the sustainability or even the folks that are working on sustainability. And so just being able to make those connections might lead to a way possible. So I see the final question, what was going to be the final question, has been already answered in the chat, but I just kind of wanted to
Uh,
leave a,
Not
oh, go ahead.
totally.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Um, I wanna make sure that we actually do get the second half of the final question. The first half was simply like a confirmation of the fact that no one can even pre-register a project successfully until it's placed in service. We want to just reiterate that, which means, yeah, the second half of this question that yes, if you are working on a project that has really long construction lead times, that means your elective payment is only coming at the end of that construction lead time. There's work that CPE has been doing with green banks and other authorities to help create revolving funds to allow every developer to access better construction financing well in advance of earning elective payments to perhaps repay that construction debt. But to Juliet, who asked that question, you're totally right that it opens you up to the risk that the funds might not be available in the future. We're not like, we don't think an IRA clawback is necessarily happening, and it's not clear that like elective payments going to just disappear no matter what political changes come by. But elective payments and the law and just the whole IRA is slated to last 10 years. So really until at least 2032, 2033, we'll I guess that's like when every project you want elective pay for needs to be done by if you're getting the investment tax credit. And Chirag, correct me if I'm wrong, but for the production tax credit, if you place that in service even in 2032, you can still get 10 years worth of tax credits, right?
I believe so, but we'll get back to you and make sure of that as well. The other, I do want to actually add to a part of your answer, Advait, which is somebody had asked about whether it's good to buy insurance on these things. And I will say this is something that the private sector users of tax credits are doing. There are insurance markets in case they're not able to monetize a credit. I can't say that those markets exist to any degree for elective pay projects yet because we haven't seen that much elective pay take up. And the thing is, you're going to have to reach a point of operation before claiming those credits. So if those markets do appear, it would be something to consider, but it would be something to consider within the bounds of the financial decision making that your entity would go through. Because we also just don't have a sense of how often projects get approved or how often projects fail. And that's partly why this whole pre-registration process exists in the first place.
Great. Well, we are out of time. So I want to thank everybody for coming today. Want to thank the Center for Public Enterprise. Hopefully, we've convinced everybody to take advantage of direct pay. But if you're still apprehensive, please reach out to either or both of the Climate Cabinet and the Center for Public Enterprise. And again, thanks everybody for being here.